10 unbelievable but documented stories of Lee Marvin. He was expelled from 15 schools. Not 5, not 8, 15. He threw a classmate out of a second-story window. His own mother couldn't stand him. By 18, he dropped out for good and enlisted in the Marines, just in time for some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific. Fast forward 20 years, he wins the Academy Award for Best Actor, playing a drunk. He dedicates half the Oscar to a horse. A few years later, he can't sing a single note, but records a song that knocks the Beatles off the #1 spot in England. But here's what nobody saw coming. The most dangerous man in Hollywood stumbled into acting because he was fixing a toilet. The combat veteran who survived 21 amphibious assaults would be buried at Arlington National Cemetery right next to boxing legend Joe Louis. And his headstone wouldn't mention a single movie. It would read, Lee Marvin, PFC, US Marine Corps, World War II. These are 10 moments from Lee Marvin's life that were documented. Let's begin. Number 1. The blue blood rebel who couldn't be tamed. On February 19th, 1924, in New York City, Lamont Waltman Marvin Jr. was born into a family that should have produced a gentleman. His father, Lamont Sr., was an advertising executive who headed the New York and New England Apple Institute. His mother, Courtney Washington David, was a fashion writer and beauty consultant. Through his mother's bloodline, he was a first cousin, 4 times removed, of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. That's who he was named after. His brother Robert got the same namesake. On paper, this was old American aristocracy. The Marvin family traced its roots to Matthew Marvin Sr., who emigrated from Essex, England in 1635 and helped found Hartford, Connecticut. Lee Marvin was also a second cousin, 6 times removed, of George Washington himself. He was descended from 2 of the most famous families in American history. None of it mattered. The boy was a walking disaster. Biographer Dwayne Epstein later speculated that Marvin suffered from undiagnosed attention deficit disorder and dyslexia, which would explain why he performed miserably in school and couldn't sit still. He was shipped from boarding school to boarding school across New York, Manlius School in Pauling, Peekskill Military Academy, getting expelled from each one for fighting, smoking, truancy, and general defiance. He later boasted about being thrown out of 15 schools. At one school, he threw a classmate out of a second-floor window. He and his mother never got along. She came from Southern aristocratic stock and expected refinement. What she got was a boy who seemed determined to destroy every opportunity placed in front of him. He was eventually sent to St. Leo College Preparatory School, a Catholic institution in Florida, where the nuns could impose stricter discipline. But here's the detail that reveals everything about Lee Marvin. Florida changed something in him, not the school, but the land, around it. Lee spent every spare weekend hunting deer, puma, wild turkey, and bobwhite quail in what he described as the wilds of the then uncharted Everglades. He became an expert marksman long before the Marines ever handed him a rifle. The boy who couldn't sit through a single class could spend days tracking game through swampland without complaint. That skill, patience, silence, and the ability to hold perfectly still and wait for the right shot would save his life in the Pacific and define his career on screen. The kid who flunked out of 15 schools was already training for war. He just didn't know it yet. Number 2, 21, beaches under fire. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Lee Marvin was 17 years old and still failing at St. Leo's. He realized he wouldn't be allowed to enlist without finishing school, so he went back to class. It was the only time academics ever mattered to him long enough to qualify. On August 12, 1942, at age 18, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps against his father's wishes. He was assigned to I Company, 3rd Battalion, 24th Marine Regiment, 4th Marine Division. After training, he qualified as a scout sniper, which meant he operated ahead of the main force, gathering intelligence and eliminating enemy targets. He wasn't sitting in a rear area filing reports. He was at the tip of the spear. The 4th Marine Division fought in the Pacific Theater, which meant island-hopping campaigns against heavily fortified Japanese positions. There were no clear front lines and no safe areas. Every yard of jungle and beach had to be taken from an enemy that almost never surrendered. Lee Marvin participated in 21 amphibious assaults. That number deserves to sink in. 21 times he climbed into a landing craft, rowed toward a hostile beach, and charged directly into enemy fire. Marines in those landing crafts were sitting ducks for artillery and machine guns, and the first waves suffered catastrophic casualties. Marvin was in those first waves over and over again. The assaults included Kwajalein, Eniwetok, and Saipan, some of the most brutal engagements of the entire war. Most Marines who survived a single amphibious assault considered themselves lucky. Lee Marvin survived 21, and then his luck ran out. Number 3, the machine gun burst that changed everything. On June 18, 1944, during the Battle of Saipan, Lee Marvin's unit was assaulting Japanese positions on Mount Tapachau when enemy machine gun fire raked across their line. Marvin was hit. A bullet severed his sciatic nerve, a catastrophic wound that should have killed him or left him crippled for life. He was also struck in the foot by an enemy sniper. He wasn't the only casualty. Most of his company was cut down during the same assault. The losses on Saipan were devastating. Marvin spent over a year in military hospitals, enduring multiple surgeries and grueling rehabilitation, fighting to walk again. Doctors told him he would always have a limp. Through sheer determination, he taught himself to disguise the permanent nerve damage well enough that most audiences never noticed it in his films, but the damage was real. And he carried pain from that machine gun burst for the rest of his life. Think about that. Every time you saw Lee Marvin walk across a screen, looking like the toughest man alive, he was compensating for a wound that never fully healed. For his service, he received the Purple Heart, the Presidential Unit Citation, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the American Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. He was medically discharged with the rank of Private First Class. Unlike many active veterans who romanticize their service, Marvin was brutally honest about what combat was actually like. He once said, I was scared to death. Anybody who wasn't scared wasn't there, and he put it even more bluntly in another interview. I got shot in the ass and sent home. That's the truth. Any man who says he enjoyed combat is either a liar or a fool. Director John Borman, who worked with Marvin on Point Blank, later observed, Lee understood violence in a way most actors never will. When he portrayed a violent man, there was a truth to it that came from having seen men kill and be killed. The menace audiences saw on screen wasn't acting. It was memory. Number 4. The plumber who accidentally became an actor. After the war, Lee Marvin was lost. He had no education to speak of, no career prospects, and a body full of shrapnel and nerve damage. He couldn't shake the anger, the frustration, and worst of all, the survivor's guilt. While other veterans considered careers as forest rangers or car salesmen, Marvin drifted back to Woodstock, New York, where he found work as a plumber's assistant at a local community theater. One day in 1946, while he was literally fixing the plumbing backstage, an actor fell ill during rehearsals for a Red Cross benefit called 10 Nights in a Barroom. Someone needed to fill in. Marvin, who happened to be the only person available, was pulled from behind the pipes and pushed onto the stage. Something clicked. The combat veteran, who couldn't sit through a classroom lecture, discovered he could hold an audience. Biographer Dwayne Epstein noted that performing provided an outlet to express his inner demons that had been frustrating him since the war. Acting didn't cure the nightmares, but it gave the rage somewhere to go. That accidental audition led to a summer stock job with the Maverick Theater in 1947, paying $7 a week. From there, Marvin used his GI Bill to study at the American Theater Wing in New York. He appeared in off-Broadway productions, including the original version of Billy Budd in 1949, and began landing small television roles on shows like Escape, The Big Story, and Treasury Men in Action. His first film role came in 1951, a small part in You're in the Navy Now, alongside another unknown at the time, named Charles Bronson. Marvin decided to stay in Hollywood, where his war experience made him invaluable on set. Directors quickly learned that the tall, silver-haired veteran with the gravelly voice could make military scenes look authentic because he'd actually lived them. He could correct the way actors held a rifle, realistic combat movement, and bring a physical truth to violence that nobody else in the room possessed. The man who started his entire career because a toilet needed fixing would become one of the most respected actors in American cinema. Lee Marvin himself summed it up perfectly. Broadway was a damn bore. The New York stage is a hustle. Hollywood, at least, felt honest. Number 5. The most terrifying villain John Ford ever filmed. In the early 1950s, Marvin was typecast as the heavy in film after film. He played psychopaths, thugs, and killers with a naturalism that unnerved audiences and co-stars alike. In The Big Heat, in 1953, he played Vince Stone, a gangster who throws scalding coffee in Gloria Graham's face, a scene that shocked audiences and remains one of the most disturbing moments in film noir history. That same year, he played a rival motorcycle gang leader opposite Marlon Brando in The Wild One. But it was John Ford who gave Marvin the role that cemented his reputation in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. In 1962, Marvin played the title character opposite John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, two of the biggest stars in Hollywood history. Marvin played Liberty Valance with such cold-blooded authority that he dominated every scene he was in, even standing across from the Duke himself. The film's title tells you everything. How the entire story revolves around the man who shot Liberty Valance. That's how dangerous Marvin made the character. He was so threatening that his death became the defining event of the film. Wayne reportedly took a liking to Marvin despite, or perhaps because of, his intensity, and specifically requested him for Donovan's Reef the following year. James Coburn, himself known for playing hard-edged roles, once said, "When Lee walked onto a set, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Everyone straightened up a bit. There was something genuinely dangerous about him that you couldn't quite put your finger on, but you definitely felt it." Here's what made Lee Marvin different from every other screen villain of that era. The other actors were pretending. Marvin was simply being himself in front of a camera, and the camera knew the difference. Number 6. The Oscar for playing a drunk and giving half to a horse. In 1965, everything changed. Lee Marvin, the career villain, was offered a dual role in Cat Ballou, a comedic western starring Jane Fonda. Kirk Douglas had been offered the part first, but his agent turned it down, thinking it was too small. Douglas later wrote in his 2007 memoir, "My agent talked me out of it because he thought the part was too small." Lee Marvin played the part and won an Oscar. Bad decision by my agent? Marvin played two characters. Kid Shalene, a hopeless, stumbling drunk who can barely stay upright on his horse, and Tim Strawn, Shalene's brother, a cold-blooded killer with a prosthetic silver nose. It was the first time audiences had seen Marvin be genuinely funny. The physical comedy was extraordinary. His pants falling around his ankles, leaning against a shed in a drunken stupor alongside an equally drunk horse, singing "Happy Birthday" at a funeral because he was too hammered to realize what was happening. The film was shot in just 32 days on a tiny budget. Nobody expected it to become a hit. It became the 7th highest grossing film of 1965, earning over $20 million at the North American box office. Marvin won the Academy Award for Best Actor, the Golden Globe, and the BAFTA. During his acceptance speech, he kept it short and finished by saying, "I think half of this belongs to a horse, somewhere out in the San Fernando Valley. The audience roared. It became one of the most quoted Oscar speeches in history. At 41 years old, the career villain was suddenly a leading man. Cat Ballou was a low-budget picture that nobody believed in. Made with an actor nobody would have cast as a comedian, it made over $20 million and won the star an Oscar. The role Kirk Douglas turned down launched the final, most iconic phase of Lee Marvin's career. According to his ex-wife, Betty Marvin, he wasn't entirely acting in those drunk scenes either, but that's a story for later. Number 7, the man who couldn't sing knocked the Beatles off, number 1. In 1969, Marvin starred alongside Clint Eastwood in Paint Your Wagon, a musical western based on the 1951 Broadway show by Lerner and Loewy. It was an unusual choice for two actors known for shooting people, not serenading them. The film cost roughly $20 million to produce and was a financial disappointment at the American box office. But something unexpected happened overseas. Marvin's rendition of Wandering Star, a melancholy song about a drifter who can never settle down, was released as a single in the United Kingdom. His co-star, Jan Seibert, described his voice as like rain gurgling down a rusty pipe. Someone else called it the first record made at 33 revolutions per minute but played at 45. Lee Marvin could not carry a tune. He knew it. He didn't care. He refused to have his voice dubbed by a professional singer and sang every note himself. In March 1970, Wandering Star went to number 1 in the United Kingdom and stayed there for 3 weeks. It also hit number 1 in Ireland for 2 weeks and reached number 10 in Australia. The song it kept off the top spot in Britain was Let It Be by the Beatles. Lee Marvin, a combat-scarred Marine who could barely hum, outsold the biggest band in the history of popular music. He never released a follow-up single. He is still considered one of the most unlikely one-hit wonders in music history. The song was later played at punk legend Joe Strummer's funeral in 2002, which tells you everything about the kind of raw, unpolished authenticity Marvin brought to everything he touched. Number 8, the trial that changed American law. In 1965, the same year he won the Oscar, Marvin began a relationship with a singer and actress named Michelle Triola. They lived together for the next 5 years, but never married. When the relationship ended in 1970, Triola did something no woman in America had ever done. She legally changed her surname to Marvin and sued him for financial compensation, as if they had been married. Michelle Triola. Marvin claimed Lee had promised to support her for life, that she had given up her singing career to be his companion, and that he had made her pregnant 3 times, paying for 2 abortions, while 1 pregnancy ended in miscarriage, with the second abortion leaving her unable to have children. She sought half of everything Marvin had earned during their years together. The case, Marvin versus. Marvin went all the way to the California Supreme Court in 1976 and established a legal concept the press immediately called palimony, a word invented specifically for this case. The court ruled that unmarried couples could make enforceable agreements regarding property and support, even without a formal marriage contract. It was a landmark decision that reshaped family law across the country. In 1979, the trial court denied Triola's claim for half of Marvin's property, but awarded her $104,000 in rehabilitation money. The dollar amount was modest, but the legal precedent was enormous. Marvin versus Marvin is still studied in law schools today, and every palimony case filed since traces directly back to Lee Marvin's living room. Meanwhile, Marvin had already moved on. In October 1970, the same year he and Triola split, he married his childhood sweetheart, Pamela Feely. They stayed together until the day he died. 17 quiet years that never made a single headline. Number 9, Hollywood's hardest drinker and the fight with the lumberjacks. Lee Marvin's drinking was legendary, even by old Hollywood standards. and old Hollywood could drink. By his own admission in a 1973 interview, he said simply, "I'm a drunk. I've been drunk most of my adult life." His drink of choice was beer with vodka chasers, starting at breakfast. Director Joshua Logan, who worked with him on Paint Your Wagon, said Marvin consumed a case of beer daily during filming. During The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, John Wayne reportedly had to carry Marvin to his trailer after he passed out between scenes. Burt Lancaster nearly threw him off a mountain during The Professionals in 1966. Director Richard Brooks had to physically intervene because Lancaster was so furious at Marvin's alcohol-fueled unreliability. But here's the detail that defines Lee Marvin's particular brand of chaos. While filming on location in Oregon, he walked into a bar and got into a fight with an entire team of lumberjacks. Not one lumberjack, a team. Multiple witnesses reported that Marvin, well into his 40s at that point, held his own against several much younger men until state police arrived to break it up. The next morning, covered in fresh bruises, he showed up to set on time, refused medical attention, and didn't ask for a single schedule adjustment. That was just Tuesday for Lee Marvin. Director Samuel Fuller, who worked with Marvin on The Big Red One, said Lee had experienced the worst of humanity during the war, and that gave him a philosophical outlook you wouldn't expect. He could be discussing Ernest Hemingway one minute and demonstrating the most efficient way to disable an opponent the next. The drinking finally caught up to him. In 1977, after his doctor showed him his liver x-rays, Marvin quit cold turkey and stayed sober for the rest of his life. The hardest drinker in Hollywood simply stopped. No rehab, no 12-step program. The same willpower that got him through 21 amphibious assaults and a year of rehabilitation from a severed nerve got him through sobriety. Notice he once told an interviewer that he was one of the first Hollywood celebrities to declare support for the gay rights movement in his 1969 Playboy interview. He added that he had no problem playing gay characters because he was secure in his own identity. What kind of public stance in 1969 from a Marine combat veteran and Hollywood tough guy was virtually unheard of. Lee Marvin didn't perform courage, he just had it. Number 10. The headstone that doesn't mention a single movie. After quitting drinking, Marvin continued working through the late 1970s and 1980s, though with fewer leading roles. He reunited with Charles Bronson for Death Hunt in 1981. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that two old pros were at work and that each can create a character with ease out of thin, cold air. He appeared in Samuel Fuller's The Big Red One in 1980, a war film based on Fuller's own combat experience, and Marvin considered it one of the best things he'd ever done. He openly preferred films that reflected the reality of war, not the glorified version. He once said he hated The Dirty Dozen, his most commercially successful film, because it was nothing like the actual war. He much preferred Hell in the Pacific and The Big Red One, both of which reflected his strong anti-war convictions. The man who had fought in 21 amphibious assaults came home opposed to war entirely, and he spoke out publicly against Vietnam. His final film was The Delta Force in 1986, alongside Chuck Norris. By then, his health was failing. That same year, he was hospitalized with coccidioidomycosis, a fungal infection known as valley fever. The steroids used to treat his breathing caused a ruptured intestine, requiring a colostomy. On August 29, 1987, at the age of 63, Lee Marvin died of a heart attack at his home in Tucson, Arizona. His wife Pamela was at his side. He'd been hospitalized for more than 2 weeks before his death, suffering from what was described as a run-down condition related to the flu. Because of his combat service, Marvin was entitled to a full military funeral. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 7A, just below the tomb of the unknown soldier, an area reserved for distinguished veterans. His grave sits right next to that of heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis. His headstone reads, Lee Marvin, PFC, US Marine Corps, World War II. No mention of the Oscar, no mention of Cat Ballou, or The Dirty Dozen, or Point Blank. No mention of Liberty Valance, the #1 hit record, or the landmark court case that changed American law. Just his name, his rank, his branch, and his war. Not a sentimental man by nature, Marvin kept only 4 souvenirs from his entire career. His Best Actor Oscar for Cat Ballou, the citation from the National Cowboy Hall of Fame for Liberty Valance, his gold record for Wandering Star, and the high-heeled shoe that Vivien Leigh once beat him with on a film set. Jeff Bridges once said that watching Lee Marvin and Robert Ryan work together in The Iceman Cometh was what made him decide to fully commit to acting. What surprised Bridges was that despite their obvious tough guy personas, they were unusually kind and giving actors. That shouldn't have surprised anyone who understood Lee Marvin. The man who couldn't sit through a classroom could sit for hours in a deer blind without moving, who fought lumberjacks in bars, supported gay rights a decade before it was safe. The man who played Hollywood's most terrifying villains chose a headstone that said nothing about movies and everything about service. Expelled from 15 schools with blue blood ancestry, 21 amphibious assaults in the Pacific, a machine gun burst on Saipan that severed a nerve and defined a career, a broken toilet that led to a stage. The most terrifying villain John Ford ever filmed, an Oscar for playing a drunk with half given to a horse, a voice so bad it knocked the Beatles off #1, a trial that invented the word palimony and changed American law, a lumberjack bar fight and Hollywood's most legendary thirst, a headstone at Arlington that doesn't mention a single movie. Lee Marvin spent his career playing dangerous men. The truth is, he didn't have to reach very far. The danger was real, the scars were real, and the man behind the silver hair and the gravelly voice had seen things that most actors can only pretend to understand. Hollywood sold him as the toughest man on screen. Arlington buried him as a Marine. His headstone chose the second version, and that tells you everything. So if you grew up watching The Dirty Dozen or Cat Ballou or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, you knew the face. Now you know the man behind it. Which moment shocked you the most? The 15 schools? The plumber who stumbled onto a stage? The song that beat the Beatles? The headstone that ignored Hollywood entirely? Let us know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories about real people who lived impossible lives. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. It truly helps us grow. Thanks for watching.